Elvis Presley had always lived in the glare of the spotlight, but behind his public persona, there were shadows few people ever saw. The fame, the adoration, the constant attention, it all came at a price. He had long ago learned the art of wearing a mask, a grin that concealed the weight of his inner struggles. Despite his riches, the wealth of his career could not fill the hollow spaces of his heart. His family had once struggled to make ends meet, and though his success had granted him everything most could only dream of, it had also distanced him from the very humanity that had shaped his life. At Marlo's, Elvis wasn't just another celebrity. He was a man seeking refuge from the pressures of being Elvis Presley. The world often saw him as larger than life, but few could understand the isolation he felt, the loneliness that haunted him in the quiet moments between concerts. He had come to Marlo's not for the fame or the extravagance, but for a sense of belonging, a place where he could be treated like a regular man, not an icon. As he sat in that corner booth studying the menu he already knew by heart, Elvis couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed. Fame had turned him into a household name, but it had also created an invisible wall between him and others. The more successful he became, the more distant he felt from the world that had once seemed so simple. He longed for genuine human connection, for the kind of warmth that came from being seen not as an entertainer but as a person with flaws, fears, and vulnerabilities. And in that moment, as he observed David Chen's subtle tremors, Elvis saw something that resonated with him deeply. David's struggle wasn't just physical, it was an emotional one. Elvis recognized the signs, the desperation to hide one's vulnerability behind a mask of professionalism, the pride that kept a person from asking for help, the silent suffering that went unnoticed by others. Elvis had lived it. He had been there too. As a child, he had watched his family scrape by, going without meals just to keep the electricity on. He knew what it was like to be hungry, not just in the stomach, but in the soul. The tremble in David's hands wasn't just a sign of illness. It was a reflection of a deeper wound, one that Elvis understood all too well. The loss of dignity, the crushing weight of circumstance, and the fear of asking for help. It was all too familiar. Elvis had once stood in David's shoes, trying to hold it all together, pretending to be fine when inside he was anything but. But tonight, something was different. As he looked at David, he saw not just a waiter but a young man struggling against the same odds he had once faced. This wasn't just about being a celebrity helping someone in need. This was about recognizing the humanity in another person and responding with empathy. It was about more than just offering a meal. It was about offering a chance for connection, for healing. As Elvis sat there, the weight of the situation began to sink in. The question that had been lingering in his mind for years, about what it truly meant to give, was starting to find its answer. It wasn't enough to just perform on stage. He had to find a way to make a real difference in the lives of those around him. David's plight wasn't just a story, it was a call to action. Elvis knew that in that moment he had a choice. He could continue to sit in his corner booth, enjoying the peace and comfort of his surroundings, or he could step into the world of another human being and offer something far more valuable than a meal, a connection that would change lives. The tension in the air grew thicker as Elvis stared at David, his gaze piercing yet gentle. He had seen this kind of struggle before. Too many times, in fact. The kind of battle that takes place quietly, in the shadows where pride and desperation collide. David had tried to mask his weakness with forced smiles and careful words, but the signs were undeniable. His frailness was impossible to ignore. The tremor in his hands, the way he leaned against tables for support, the unmistakable growl from his stomach. It was a cry for help that David could no longer suppress, even if he tried to hide it beneath a mask of politeness. Elvis had heard his share of excuses from people trying to shield their vulnerabilities, but something about David's deflection felt different. It wasn't just the polite refusal to accept help, it was the deeper layers of fear and shame that lingered beneath the surface. David wasn't just denying hunger, He was denying the very possibility of being cared for. Elvis could see that. He could feel it. The young man's pride had become a barrier, not just for himself but for anyone who might want to help. "David," Elvis said softly, his voice steady but laced with compassion, "I am not asking as a customer to a waiter. I am asking as one human being to another. When did you last eat?" The question hit David with the force of an emotional blow. His face flushed with embarrassment, and for a moment the facade cracked. Elvis watched as the young man struggled to maintain composure. His bright smile faded, replaced by a vulnerability so raw, it seemed to reach out and grab Elvis's heart. David's voice trembled as he tried to maintain his usual professionalism, but it was clear he was barely holding on. "I'm fine, Mr. Presley. I just need a little rest." "Been working some extra shifts," David said, his words forced, as if he could somehow will his body into submission. But Elvis was not fooled. He had seen that look before. He had worn it himself. There was a long, uncomfortable silence, as David attempted to move away, but his body betrayed him once more. Another loud stomach growl echoed through the restaurant, too pronounced to ignore. David's knees buckled slightly from weakness. His struggle was no longer hidden behind the mask of professionalism. The hunger was impossible to overlook. "Sit down, son," Elvis insisted gently, guiding David to the booth across from him. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted in that moment. The diners, previously lost in their own worlds, began to notice the quiet intensity of the scene unfolding. Elvis's simple act of kindness had made the invisible visible, and in doing so it had set the stage for something far greater than just one meal. Elvis leaned in, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Son, I am not asking for your pride's sake. I am asking because I been there, and I know what it's like to go without. When did you last have a proper meal?" David's carefully maintained professionalism shattered completely, and tears welled up in his eyes. He tried to blink them away, but his body could no longer keep the emotions at bay. "3 days ago," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "3 days ago, I had crackers and peanut butter. 3 days ago." The words hit Elvis like a punch to the gut. He couldn't comprehend it. Here was a young man working hard, doing everything he could to make ends meet, and yet he had gone without food for days. The very notion of it angered Elvis, but it wasn't just anger. It was a deep, unshakable compassion for someone who was quietly suffering. David continued, explaining his situation, how his family was struggling in California, how his rent had gone up, and how he had chosen gas money over food to keep his responsibilities intact. Elvis's heart ached as he listened. This wasn't just about hunger, it was about the crushing weight of responsibility, the pressure of doing everything on your own, and the fear of asking for help. Elvis was no stranger to this feeling. He had carried the burden of responsibility for his family, for his fans, and for his own survival. The idea of struggling in silence, hiding behind a mask of pride, was something he could relate to all too well. But in that moment, Elvis understood that he had the power to do something real and transformative. "David," Elvis said, his voice now firm with the resolve of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "First things first, we set to going to get some food in you right now. What do you usually eat here?" David hesitated, his pride still holding him back. "I can accept charity from you, Mr. Presley. I have my pride." "This isn't such charity, David," Elvis interrupted gently. "This is one human being taking care of another. You've been taking great care of me for 2 years now. Let me return the favor." The kindness in Elvis's voice broke through David's defenses. For the first time that evening, David allowed himself to let go, to feel the weight of what he had been carrying, and to accept help. It wasn't about charity, it was about connection, about recognizing a fellow human being's pain and doing something to ease it. As Elvis watched David struggle to regain his strength, the weight of the situation sank deeper into his soul. This wasn't just about offering a meal, however generous that might be. It was about seeing a fellow human being, someone trying desperately to hold on to their dignity and extending a hand when the world seemed to look away. Elvis had been there. He had known the feeling of fighting alone, of keeping a brave face while silently carrying burdens too heavy to bear. David, still weak from hunger, sat across from him, slowly working through his meal. Elvis watched, not just as a man offering charity, but as a man recognizing something far more profound, a moment of vulnerability that could change the trajectory of a person's life. This wasn't just about food. It was about giving David a sense of worth, reminding him that he wasn't invisible, that his struggles were seen and that someone cared. But as Elvis sat there, something larger began to take shape in his mind. This wasn't an isolated incident. David wasn't the only one suffering in silence. There were others, countless others, who walked around with hidden wounds, pretending that everything was fine when in reality they were drowning. Elvis understood the power of empathy in that moment, and it dawned on him that his success, his fame, meant nothing if he couldn't use it to make a difference in the world around him. "David," Elvis said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "what you set are going through, it's set's not right. People shouldn't have to make these kinds of choices. No one should have to choose between food and rent. I want to help, not just tonight, but in a way that lasts." David, still in disbelief at the kindness unfolding before him, could barely find the words to respond. But Elvis wasn't finished yet. His gaze shifted to Betty Marlo, the restaurant owner, who had been quietly observing the interaction. He motioned for her to come over, and she approached the table, concern etched on her face. "Betty," Elvis began, his voice more resolute now, "this can be just about one meal for one man. This is bigger than that. I want to set up something here, a way for the people who work for you to get the help they need when life hits them hard." Betty, still reeling from the revelation of David Sepp's struggles, nodded slowly. "What are you suggesting, Elvis?" "I want to start a fund for your employees," Elvis replied, the determination in his voice undeniable. "A Marlowe's Family Fund. It'll provide assistance for situations like David's emergency help when someone's in need, and scholarships for those who want to improve their lives and get an education. I want to make sure no one here ever has to go hungry again." David, still processing the enormity of the conversation, looked up at Elvis, his eyes now filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He had come to Marlowe's hoping for a peaceful night, but instead, he found himself at the heart of a life-changing moment. "What if we could help others?" Elvis continued, his words picking up speed as the vision for the future took form. "What if we could turn this restaurant into a place where kindness and compassion weren't just part of the menu but the foundation of everything we do? No one should be afraid to ask for help. We can change that." The ripple effect was immediate. Other staff members who had quietly observed the conversation from the periphery began to gather around the table, sharing their own stories of hardship. They too had struggled in silence. But with Elvis's intervention, the space became more than just a restaurant. It became a sanctuary of shared vulnerability and mutual support. Elvis's presence sparked something bigger, a collective shift in consciousness. What had been an isolated crisis was now a catalyst for something much greater. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in Marlowe's transformed. Customers who had once been unaware of the struggles unfolding behind the scenes began offering their own support, leaving larger tips, asking how they could contribute to the fund, and offering job opportunities to the employees. The entire culture of the restaurant began to shift from one of passive observation to active compassion. And as David, now nourished both physically and emotionally, continued to eat under Elvis's watchful eye, he realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Elvis wasn't just a celebrity who helped because he could. He was someone who used his position of power to create lasting change. Elvis wasn't just seeing a person in need. He was seeing a person's potential. And in doing so, he helped David and countless others see their own worth. The impact of that evening at Marlowe's rippled far beyond the walls of the small family-owned restaurant. As the days passed, Elvis's intervention didn't just help David. It transformed the way the entire community viewed responsibility, compassion, and the importance of seeing one another beyond the surface. What began as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a movement, one that transcended the individual and spoke to the power of collective humanity. David, nourished not just by food but by the kindness that had been shown to him, began to regain his strength. The transformation was evident in the color that returned to his face, the steadiness in his steps, and the gratitude that filled his eyes. But perhaps the most powerful change occurred within his heart. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to be seen, not as an employee, not as someone who was merely filling a role, but as a human being with dignity and worth. As the evening ended, and David left the restaurant with a renewed sense of hope, the promise of Elvis's commitment began to take shape. The Marlowe's family fund was officially established, a lasting legacy that would provide financial support to employees in crisis and scholarships for those who wanted to better their futures. The fund became a beacon of hope for many who had long felt invisible, offering a safety net for those who needed it the most. But the real change went beyond the tangible contributions. It was the cultural shift that Elvis had inspired, the realization that businesses could be both profitable and compassionate. No longer would the employees at Marlowe's have to choose between their job and their well-being. They no longer had to silently endure hardships, pretending everything was fine when in reality they were struggling. Elvis had shown them that it was okay to need help, and in turn they learned that true strength came not from self-reliance alone, but from the willingness to accept help when it was offered with compassion. In the weeks that followed, Betty Marlo, the restaurant owner, implemented regular check-ins with her staff, making sure that no one was suffering in silence. A system was put in place to identify financial hardships before they turned into crises. The restaurant became a model for others, a shining example of how to create an environment where employees felt supported, valued, and seen. David's life, too, took a dramatic turn for the better. With Elvis's financial assistance and the scholarship fund, he was able to pay off his overdue rent, cover his bills, and finish his education. He graduated with honors in engineering and went on to have a successful career. But no matter where life took him, he never forgot that night, never forgot how Elvis had taken the time to notice him, to see through the surface, and to offer a lifeline when he needed it most. Years later, when reporters would ask David about that transformative evening, his voice would always carry a depth of gratitude. Elvis's greatest gift wasn't the money or the immediate help, he would say, reflecting on the experience. It was that he saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. He reminded me that struggling doesn't make you weak, and that accepting help doesn't make you a failure. As for Elvis, the experience stayed with him for the rest of his life. He often cited that night as one of the most meaningful moments of his career, not because of the recognition or the public acclaim it brought him, but because it taught him something profound about what it truly meant to care for others. In later interviews, he would reflect on how that evening had reshaped his understanding of what it meant to be a true humanitarian. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about paying attention, truly seeing the people around him, and responding with kindness and compassion. The Marlowe's family fund continued to operate long after Elvis's death, helping hundreds of restaurant workers and their families navigate financial crises. The impact of that night rippled across the nation, inspiring other restaurants to adopt similar programs and encouraging employers to see the humanity in their employees, not just the work they provided. Elvis Presley's encounter with David Chen that evening at Marlowe's restaurant was more than just a moment of compassion. It was a profound lesson on the true meaning of human connection. It showed that kindness isn't measured by the size of the gesture, but by the willingness to see another person, to recognize their struggle, and to offer help without judgment. For Elvis, it wasn't about the fame or accolades. It was about understanding that true healing comes not just from the music he created, but from the empathy he shared with others. The story of David's struggle and Elvis's intervention serves as a timeless reminder that we all carry hidden burdens. In our fast-paced lives, it's easy to overlook the quiet pain of those around us. The exhaustion behind the smile, the hunger behind the polite words, the loneliness behind the laughter. But when we take a moment to truly see someone, to extend a hand without expectation, we not only change their world, we change our own. Elvis didn't just see David as a waiter or a man struggling in silence. He saw a fellow human being worthy of dignity, compassion, and care. And by acting on that understanding, he ignited a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of many. The ripple effects of that night continue to spread, not because of Elvis's fame, but because he chose to care. This story is a call to each of us. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to notice the quiet struggles that others may be hiding, and to take action in the ways that we can. How often do we overlook those around us, assuming they're fine when in reality they may be struggling in ways we can't see? Elvis taught us that no matter how small the act of kindness, it has the power to heal, to transform, and to inspire others to do the same. It's a reminder that each of us has the ability to make a difference in the lives of those around us, just by offering empathy and support. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment when you noticed someone who needed help, but didn't know how to reach out? How did you respond? How has empathy shaped your relationships? And how can you make a difference today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, kindness is not just an act, it's a movement.